You've had Wendy's nuggets dipped in sauce, but have you had them covered in sauce? Wendy's new Saucy Nuggs take the crispy and spicy nugs you love and turn them up to 11. Choose between flavors like buffalo, honey barbecue, garlic, parm, or if you're a real heat seeker, spicy ghost pepper. I tried it. It is very, very spicy. But I will say the spicy honey barbecue, elite. Only on Wendy's signature spicy nugs. 7 delicious ways to try the nugs you already love. Pick a flavor, grab some extra napkins, and prepare to nug like you've never nugged before. For a whole new way to nug, it's got to be Wendy's at participating Wendy's. Welcome to Andy Staples on 3. It is game week. We already have results in the book. Some pretty surprising ones at that. We got news. We got picks today against the spread for week 1. It's all happening. It's all happening. It is game week. It is a very exciting time. I got to tell you, though, the schedule changes because it's game week. So there is no show on Friday because there is a show on Saturday night to recap all the games. So Monday through Thursday in the morning, Saturday night. So adjust your clocks and calendars accordingly. I know we're all going to be watching the games anyway. So when the games end, let's say roughly about, midnight and 1 second. That's when you should tune in. I'll just tell you, midnight and 1 second. Right as Saturday turns to Sunday. That's when you need to tune in this week. Midnight and 1 second. Just remember that. All right. We got a special guest today. On 3's Jesse Simonton joins me. He's going to help me pick games. Jesse, we have much to discuss from the weekend. Florida State falls to Georgia Tech in Dublin on a walk-off field goal. The Yellow Jackets whip the Seminoles on the line of scrimmage. Double-digit underdogs coming away with the win. And everything we said for 9 months means nothing.
I mean, isn't that the biggest lesson, is that we really don't know anything? I mean,
yes.
You can have theories, you can have guesstimations, you can have, our thoughts and our, premonitions. But in the end, we got to actually see some football until we, to know what these teams truly are. Now, I think part of the problem with Florida State is that all the noise coming out of Tallahassee was that Mike Norvell was pretty confident in his team. Now, was that hubris? Was that arrogance? DJU kind of was DJU. He was who he's always been. But there's a ceiling on that, and they went into a game that they thought they could win a rock fight, and instead, it was Brent Key's team just chucking the stones right back at them.
Yeah, and it was Brent Key's offensive line dominating Florida State's defensive line up front. And this is supposed to be a pretty good Florida State defensive line. And look, if you talk to NFL scouts, we had Jim Nagy on. He's talked about how good some of those guys can be at the next level. But he said this last week, and I'm not sure how much people were paying attention. He said they're not as deep as they were last year on the D-line, which means as the game goes on, you're going to have big guys being tired, which is what you saw with Darrell Jackson and what you saw, on the interior, Josh Farmer. Like, those guys were playing a lot of snaps. Like last year, Braden Fisk did not have to play as many snaps as Darrell Jackson and Josh Farmer had to play on Saturday. And when you're playing against an offensive line that is playing really well, like Georgia Tech's was, that is going to wear on you. And it showed in the game, Jesse, because, I go back to Florida State's best offensive drive actually was when they converted those 2 fourth downs. They had no choice but to go for those 4th downs because that was Mike Norvell saying, I don't trust my defense to not let Georgia Tech just grind off 8 minutes of clock.
Yeah, there was only 7 possessions for each team in this game. So this was, it was a rock fight game, and Florida State came up, empty. Yeah, another guy that you didn't mention on the defensive line, but to just kind of put an exclamation point on your point, Marvin Jones Jr. I mean, he's a guy that was playing backup snaps at Georgia last year. There's a lot of, buzz about him in Florida State's camp, but he looked gassed as well. I mean, he had a chance to kind of sack Haynes King on one big play, and King made a hell of a kind of spin move out and seed down the field for a big first down on Tech's, I think, go-ahead touchdown drive there. But Florida State's going to have to regroup quickly because there's not a lot of time to do kind of a deep dive autopsy on what the offense could do, because we're talking about the defensive line. The offensive line, boasts a couple all ACC preseason guys, and they certainly got pushed around. They gave up 7 tackles for loss. DJU, again, he just refuses to kind of throw the ball over the middle. That's something we've seen now, frankly, for 3-4 years. But they're going to have to come up with some answers quickly, because obviously they play Boston College. The game against a Memphis team, that's going to be tricky. And if you still want to win, the ACC, you got some big boys against Clemson, Miami left on the schedule there.
Yeah, that's the thing. It gets dark pretty quick if we're assuming that Georgia Tech is an average team. I don't know that Georgia Tech is an average team, though. This, I think, tells you that Georgia Tech can play with anybody on that schedule. It is the toughest ACC schedule. It's the toughest ACC in-conference schedule. It's also the toughest ACC out-of-conference schedule because of Notre Dame and Georgia. But here's the thing. So I have a new bracketology projection at On3 that came out this morning, Jesse. And we weren't going to do one this week, but then this game happened. Plus, you had the ESPN halftime show incorrectly explaining how the seeding process works. So I was like,
pretty brilliant.
Right, we've got to explain this. But so I actually put Georgia Tech in as the ACC champ for a couple reasons. One, a little bit of a cop-out. Like, hey, I'm not sure if I want to pick Miami or NC State or Virginia Tech or Louisville or who else. But also because here's the scenario: like, Georgia Tech doesn't have to beat Georgia and Notre Dame to make the playoff. Like, they could go 7-1 in ACC play, lose to Notre Dame and Georgia, win the ACC championship game, and they're still in the playoff.
That you talk about a team coming out of nowhere. That sure would be something. They had a preseason win total of, I think, 5.5 or 4.5. And it's because of that schedule. Did you see that stat, Andy, that was going around that Brent Key now has more ranked wins over a ranked team than Mike Norvell?
Yeah.
And he's been the head coach, for basically half of an interim season, a full season in one game. I mean, he's 5-0 against ranked ACC teams. With the way Tech's recruiting, I mean, this was you talk about putting a cherry on top of a nice month. You land the 5-star. You have like your highest ranked recruiting class in the top 20 in well over a decade, and then you just go in Dublin and down Florida State. I mean, that's the Bees are feeling pretty good right now.
So they're an interesting case too, because I was talking to our friends at VolQuest, Brent Hubbs and Austin Price on their show on Sunday night. And Brent made the point that when Georgia Tech has a defined identity, they are a problem. And, you go back to Paul Johnson, it was a very different identity and people didn't like the option, but the option made them tough to deal with. This Brent Key, run the ball, like this, we're going to be tough on both lines of scrimmage. Like that's a brand that travels. And it's so interesting because Jeff Collins, who we're going to talk about in a few minutes when we pick the North Carolina Minnesota game, but Jeff Collins came in wanting to brand Georgia Tech, but it was all this exterior stuff, the Waffle House, all that. Like Brent Key has branded Georgia Tech. He's created a brand for Georgia Tech. It's just an on-field brand.
No, when the irony is too, they're basically they're running the option just out of the shotgun. Yeah, I mean, that's the funniest thing. I mean, Haynes King can throw it, but he only attempted 16 passes. But Buster Faulkner, the offensive coordinator there, has an air raid background, but he spent several years on Georgia's staff under Todd Monken, and they were coming up with some crazy motion runs, and now he's taken that and just dialed it up. He's just cranked up the dial, and so they're hard with the way they kind of move, not only the pocket but just kind of move all these guys around. I mean, they're gonna be tough, and they got a bunch of little jitterbugs out there. I don't know if they got a receiver that's over 5'9", but they all can. They're slippery, they're fast, and Florida State found out the hard way.
So if you love football and the X's and O's part of it, and you're not subscribed to Dan Casey's daily email. So Dan Casey's a coach. He's on Twitter. He's on Instagram. You should be following him on both. It's really fun because he's always posting really, really cool plays that he finds. And it could be like a college play from the 50s or an NFL play he saw last weekend or some high school play that somebody sent him. It's all this cool stuff. But he has a one play a day email. Today's one play a day email was the GH counter that Georgia Tech was running against Florida State. And what GH counter means is you pull the backside guard. So if you're running right, which would be you hand off to the back on the right side, he kind of acts like he's going to run left and then scoots right. So if you're running right, the left guard pulls. You have your H-back, tight end kind of guy. He does a little short motion while he's on the left side and then comes flying around the corner to crush the end guy or that last guy on the line of scrimmage. And it is a great play, very well designed. They have the athletes to run it, which is another prerequisite that it's not always so easy, but it's fun to watch. So yeah, I'm excited to see what happens to Georgia Tech. Florida State, as you mentioned, they play Boston College on Labor Day. They cannot go 0-2 in the ACC. Like, they better get that figured out. And DJU, you mentioned, like, DJU's DJU. And I don't know if I saw it as much when he was at Oregon State because that Oregon State defenses were so scared of what they do running the ball. They weren't really trying to heat up DJU as much. But when he gets blitzed, he does not move that fast. And it's interesting because when he takes off and runs with the ball, he can move pretty well. But when he's moving laterally within the pocket, he just does not move as fast as some of these other guys.
Well, it's not only that, he's not decisive in his decision. So it's I think it's like a slow, pocket awareness, and then it's frustrating to watch. I mean, it's kind of remarkable still to think about what he showed against Notre Dame as a freshman 5 years ago now, and he has looked nothing like that. I mean, he certainly wasn't aided. Florida State isn't exactly. It's clear that they're not flush with receiver talent. They missed Hakeem Williams, I think. Malik Benson's okay. But you got
to try to throw it to them, and they didn't even try to throw it to him until the very end of the second quarter.
And then they did dial up 2 shot plays, and DJU missed them. He threw one short, and he threw one, over the guy's head, and both of those might have been walk-in touchdowns. But that's gonna be the margins Florida State's playing with all year, because if they had a better option behind DJU, somebody else would be playing.
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, because there's politics to it now when you do the big NIL deal, but
for sure,
Brock Glenn's sitting there, and there were a lot of people, if you talk to them this time last year when Jordan Travis was still healthy and obviously finishing his final year, who thought Brock Glenn would be the successor to Jordan Travis. So it still might be the case. We'll find out. We got to talk a little bit more news before we pick some games, but first, I got to tell you about Game Time. Do you want to go to some of these games that we're about to talk about? We're going to talk about Florida, Miami in the Swamp. We're going to talk about Notre Dame and Texas A&M at Kyle Field, Georgia and Clemson in Atlanta at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, LSU USC in Vegas. These games all happening. They're all sold out, but you can still get tickets on Game Time. Use the code STAPLES for $20 off your first purchase. It's so easy. You can look exactly at where your seat will be, know exactly what it's going to look like, know you are getting that seat, know you have ease of transferring between yourself and your friends. Download the Game Time app. Use the code STAPLES for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. These games, they're not unreachable. You can get there. Go to Game Time. Download. Use the code STAPLES. $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Now, Michigan's playing Fresno State. That's not going to be one of the games probably that we talk about this week unless they're not very good. But we still are talking about Michigan last year because they have received the notice of allegations from the NCAA regarding the Connor Stalions case. And this is not going to get resolved this season, Jesse. As you know, the NCAA wheels of justice turn slowly. So Michigan will have 90 days to respond. There'll be 30 more days to respond at that. Then they got to set a hearing. So this is all going to happen next season. But I love that the NOA gets dropped on them 2 days before the Connor Stalions documentary drops on Netflix.
So what are our thoughts on that? I mean, because I kind of think that this documentary is going to be a nothing burger. Maybe I'm going to be wrong. I just the way the Florida one played out last year, I'm skeptical. But it will be hilarious if it actually A, is good, and B, there's like, oh, Connor Stalions is on camera and he's like, hell yeah, that was me in Central Michigan gear on the sideline.
Yeah.
If he's like puffing his chest out, that would be classic. I'm just skeptical. Obviously, it drops on Tuesday. The timing of this is certainly eye-opening. Michigan fans are, continue to be apoplectic that this is even a storyline. But hey, that college football is all about rivals just continuing to throw mud at rivals, and so that's
so the draft copy that ESPN obtained a few weeks ago, it seems to be fairly similar to the one that landed. Now, everybody's going to say, "Oh, this is all Connor." It's not all Connor Stalions. It's actually there's 11 allegations in it. 2 of them involve Connor Stalions, and then everything else is there's like recruiting stuff and other things. So I don't know exactly how this is all going to shake out, and we won't know for a while. But the Connor Stalions documentary, I'm with you because this Untold series, it's been a lot of, if you actually follow the sport, it's stuff you already knew. The stuff I've seen on the Steve, I haven't seen the Steve McNair documentary yet, but it's one of those things where I think if you were following that case and you followed Steve McNair's NFL career, you didn't learn much. And if you didn't know anything about it, which is most of the audience that they're trying to reach, you're like, wow, what a story. And I think that's what's going to happen here. Now, everybody who's involved in this is signed an NDA, and they've not really made it available to see early. So all you got are these little whispers. And the only little juicy whisper I heard, and I'm not sure if I believe this, is that he's going to name people who are doing the same thing for other programs. And
that would be spicy.
That would be interesting. Yeah.
That would be spicy because I'm with you. I mean, you could have the Florida one in particular. I think it should have been redubbed Told. The
right.
story that you've heard before, because there was not. I mean, they could have read all your news clippings as a beat writer. When you were at the Tampa Bay Times back then covering the Gators and
Tampa Tribune, baby. No, that was the competition.
Tampa Tribune.
May the Tampa Tribune rest in peace.
All that stuff would have been in the news already. So the Manziel one was pretty good. But I'm with you. I'm skeptical.
Well, I do want to see it because I want to hear him. Like, I've only heard him talk a couple times. Like, we've read so much about this guy, but there's so little available video interview footage. Like, I just want to get a sense of the person. So part I'm kind of interested in seeing.
That, and I mean, does he actually? How transparent is he about? Which is funny. We're talking about stealing signs. Transparent.
Yeah,
how transparent is he? How transparent is he about his manifesto and this whole deal that he did, where he basically from the jump from years ago wrote this huge thing about how he wanted to ultimately become the head coach at Michigan. I would be fascinated to hear him talk about that if he actually does.
I think he's going to say, I was a lone wolf. I didn't tell the coaches anything I was doing. I don't think he's going to do anything to hurt Michigan, at least not intentionally. Yeah. So that would be my guess, because he's now a beloved cult figure there. He doesn't want to lose that part of it.
The Schadenfreude, though, if he does start naming some folks, that would
especially if they left it in, it would probably mean they could prove that it's true, and then because if I'm whatever production company's making this for Netflix and he just starts naming people, I'm like, listen, I'm not putting that in the thing unless we know that's true, because I'm gonna get sued. So we'll find out exactly how that goes. But yeah, if he can say that everybody else was doing this, which something Michigan fans have been saying all along, it doesn't matter because you got caught, and being the one who's dumb enough to get caught is still a thing. But it's definitely interesting and juicy.
I can't believe Central Michigan still hasn't. It's like we can neither confirm nor deny that was Connor Stalions. That in and of itself just is still hilarious.
It's so
we
good.
Just have this grainy shot that looks like it was from like the Zapruder film.
Yes,
like we're like trying to figure out, who's on the grassy knoll here, and we still like their program still can't say yay or nay that was Connor Stalions. Man,
it's amazing, truly amazing. So we'll find out more. Well, I'm look. This thing drops on Tuesday, so we'll get a review on the show. I will give everybody a review on the show. I'll watch it as soon as humanly possible, and we will definitely talk about it. Goat Dog, let's talk about Montana State coming back against New Mexico. It was a great game. Yes, that's the best. Now, the game was in Albuquerque, but best thing that's come out of Bozeman since the last time they filmed an episode of Yellowstone. So that was a fun game. We got a lot of fun games coming up, Jesse, though. Before we talk about the week 1 games, before we pick these week 1 games, I got to tell everybody about PrizePicks, most fun daily fantasy game in America. Right now, if you use the code STAPLES, play $5, you get $50 instantly to play. And there's already picks on the board for week 1. That's right, for Thursday night games. Remember, Colorado is playing North Dakota State on Thursday night. Minnesota is playing North Carolina on Thursday night. We're about to talk about those games. What do you think Shedeur Sanders is going to do? What do you think Max Brosmer, the bro, you heard him on this show, former New Hampshire quarterback, now starting for Minnesota against North Carolina. Omarion Hampton, one of the best returning running backs that nobody's talking about. He's going to be playing for North Carolina in that game. North Carolina with a revamped defense. Does that change how much Max Brosmer can throw for? Meanwhile, you've got Colorado and North Dakota State. You had Dion at Big 12 Media Days talking about how disciplined that defense is at North Dakota State, how good Colorado has to be to win this game, because this is one of the programs that's not going to come in scared of an FBS team. Shedeur Sanders, how's he going to do in a first game behind a revamped offensive line that they think is going to be better? Travis Hunter, how many snaps does he play on each side of the ball? How does he do as a receiver? Jimmy Horn, all of it available on PrizePicks. Those players I just mentioned on the board right now. Play $5, get $50 instantly with the code STAPLES. All right, Jesse, we got to pick some games. We will start off with that North Dakota State Colorado game. Colorado's a 9.5-point favorite. The total on this thing is 58.5. Dion at Big 12 Media Days did the correct thing of, hey, this is a game I wish my AD had never scheduled. I don't know why we're playing this team. These guys are well coached. That said, Matt Ince, the coach for North Dakota State last year, is now the co-DC, well, kind of assistant DC, because Dan Lynn's the DC, but at the linebackers coach at USC, basically. North Dakota State has had turnover. That David Braun, who's the current head coach at Northwestern, was the DC at North Dakota State 2 years ago. Like, they're not necessarily the superpower they once were. South Dakota State has kind of taken that spot in the FCS, but North Dakota State is still one of the best teams in the FCS.
Yeah, I believe they're still ranked 1 or 2 in the preseason, the FCS preseason poll this year. But you know what? I don't know if I believe in Colorado for the full season. I certainly do not believe in Deion Sanders' long-term future in Boulder there, but I do believe they can cover the 9.5 on Thursday night. I think partly here, Andy, we're going to find out real quickly if they have, shored up those offensive and defensive lines, specifically defensively. You bring in Dion Hayes, you bring in BJ Green, some of these guys. I think depth later in the season for Colorado, it could come into question, much like we saw last year. But this is going to be the best team they have, to start. I mean, they're fresh. You brought in all these transfers. On the flip side, while North Dakota State can run the hell out of the ball, I think they had 47 rushing touchdowns a year ago, again, going up against one of the worst run defenses for the Buffs last season. Different looking group this year. They're beat up. They have a bunch. They've suffered a bunch of injuries. Reading about their team recently in the preseason. So I think that's why this line has moved 2 points. This line opened at 7.5, 9.5 now. I think Shedeur and Travis and company can cover the number here.
Yeah, I do too. I think Colorado's going to cover this. I don't know about the total. I don't know, because I think maybe you slow things down. Colorado's running Pat Shurmur's offense now, and it's not Pat Shurmur calling Sean Lewis's offense like at the end of last season. I'm guessing that this is a slower paced offense in part to protect the defense. And you mentioned the D lineman they've brought in. They've brought in some guys who are probably NFL players on the D line. And that's the one thing Deion Sanders has been very adamant about, is he likes this defensive line. He has not been real talkative about the offensive line, although the thought is that this is going to be a better group than last year, but that really isn't saying much, because last year's offensive line, was party to 56 sacks, and that was the second worst in the FBS. Only Old Dominion, I think, had more. So they've got to be better up front. Got to be better up front. I think they will be on defense. Not sure on offense yet.
Yeah, I'm not a Pat Shurmur believer, but I think they can score enough on Saturday, or on Thursday, excuse me.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens, but I think Colorado covers this one. Also Thursday night, this I think may be the more fun game on Thursday night. And this was there was a game at Minnesota last year on the Thursday night of week 1 that was highly entertaining, frustrating to watch as a football fan. But last year, remember, Minnesota played Nebraska on that Thursday opening night. Nebraska's defense forced Minnesota to throw a bunch, like not what they wanted to do. And Minnesota only won because Jeff Sims just kept handing the ball back to them. And they wanted a thriller. This time, North Carolina comes in. Jesse, this line flipped yesterday. So Minnesota was favored by a point and a half on Sunday afternoon, and it flipped within 5 minutes at about 8:37 Eastern time. It flipped to North Carolina being favored by a point and a half on the road. Now, the one piece of information, and it's not new information that's public, is Darius Taylor, the running back for Minnesota, who averaged 133 yards a game last year, but didn't play as much as you would have wanted to see him play as a freshman because he had hamstring issues. He got hurt in a public practice. So practice that was open to the public. He got hurt a couple of weeks ago. And so it's unclear whether he's going to play. We had the PrizePicks board up. They've got the star players from all the other teams playing Thursday, but there's no Darius Taylor square because it's not clear whether he's going to play. But he makes a big, big difference if he's playing or if he's not playing.
Yeah, he averaged almost 6 yards a carry last year as a freshman. This is, we were texting about this last night when the line moved. We're going to talk about the Florida-Miami game, which I, dubbed the Anxiety Bowl. This has got to be just like the paranoia showcase, because neither of these teams want to release a depth chart. Neither of these head coaches held a spring game because they didn't want to tip their hand to the other. North Carolina, it sounds like they're going to roll with 2 quarterbacks. They're going to play Max Johnson and Colin Harrell. You talk about unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns with this one. So I think you're just kind of covering your eyes and kind of pointing in one direction or the other. I would probably go with the Tar Heels just because they have a Marion Hampton. They've made some portal additions defensively. Another big loss for Minnesota is, you lose one of their top assistants, longtime defensive coordinator, ends up leaving and going
to Michigan State.
With Jonathan Smith at Michigan State. So I think, first game without him, I would go with the Heels here, even though it's on the road.
So both these teams replacing their defensive coordinators. Remember, Gene Chizik got fired last year at North Carolina. They bring in Jeff Collins. And we talked about Jeff Collins earlier and about how he tried to brand Georgia Tech as the head coach in an external way instead of creating a defined brand of how they play football. Now, it didn't work for him as a head coach. But here's the thing. Everywhere he's been as a defensive coordinator, he's been really good, whether that was Mississippi State, Florida, UCF. Like he's been a good defensive coordinator. And I thought it was interesting, Jesse. We talked about Florida State, Georgia Tech earlier. One of the things we didn't mention when we were talking about that is Tyler Santucci's defense at Georgia Tech. So Tyler Santucci was the DC at Duke under Mike Elko last year. He goes to Georgia Tech. Suddenly a team that couldn't tackle anything was tackling everything. And I think we need to pay attention to that in this North Carolina game, in LSU USC, where you have new defensive coordinators on both sides of the game. And that matters because those teams that can't tackle, that get a new DC and suddenly they practice in spring and practice in preseason camp and learn to tackle, well, guess what? They can get quickly better. So with North Carolina, are they a better tackling team under Jeff Collins? There's a good chance they could be.
What was his nickname? Was it the Minister of Mayhem? Wasn't it
the Minister
like
of Mayhem? And he has the people that jump up and down on third down, the money down stuff. There's a lot of like schlocky stuff with him, but
yeah,
the scheme is sound and it works. It's worked at places where you're playing really good competition, and those defenses were not like they were good against good competition. So I just think this is going to help them. I don't know what the quarterback situation is going to be because like the Max Johnson transfer, he's been at LSU. He's been the starter. He obviously was not going to be the starter at Texas A&M this year with Connor Wigman healthy again. So it wasn't like he was a massive, prize in the transfer portal that if you take this guy out of the portal and you give him an NIL deal, you have to start him. Like he was just looking for somewhere where he could legitimately compete for the job. And I guess he's legitimately competing for the job, but we don't know who's won it yet.
Yeah, and I think it's a little concerning. But again, he's not even in the quarterback we're talking about here. Johnson and Harrell play in the spring, and then Mac Brown says, "Man, I think we need another body there," and they go and
Jacoby
bring
Criswell,
back
yeah,
Jacoby Criswell, who had left and North Carolina and gone to Arkansas. Criswell apparently didn't show up in the camp in great shape, so he's kind of behind the eight ball, not in the race currently. The two quarterback system is not something that we've seen work all that often in modern college football, but Max seems to be rolling with it. So I'm at least intrigued to watch this on Thursday night.
Yeah, I hate to be that guy and we agree on everything, but I'm going to take North Carolina here too. I do think they're going to be slightly better on defense. I think the pressure from last year of Drake May having to be Drake May being the top 5 pick, like in a weird way, I think it's going to help them not having that this year.
And Hampton's a dude. I mean,
Hampton's awesome. Yeah,
he's a guy. He's a guy that if they lean on him, he may rush for 1,800 yards this year.
Yeah, and the thing is, these two teams actually may want to play a similar style of game. Like they may both want to run it, but if Darius Taylor's not playing, and again, we don't know if he will. Like if he shows up, you may see that line flip. Like if you find out he's dressing out on Thursday, that line may flip again to Minnesota being favored. So we'll find out. But I'm going to go with North Carolina to cover there, 1.5 points. Let us move to lovely Morgantown, West Virginia. Penn State at West Virginia. Penn State is an 8.5 point favorite. The total here is 51.5. West Virginia, one of those sneaky teams that won 9 games last year. They have probably a tougher schedule this year, but they've got Garrett Green, who is a very feast or famine, boom or bust kind of quarterback. And Penn State has a new offensive coordinator in Andy Kotelnicki. Drew Aller's back. We don't know what their receiving core is going to look like with Julian Fleming coming in from Ohio State. What do you think happens here?
I mean, one does not just roll into Morgantown and cover, a nearly 2 touchdown or at least a 10-point spread. I think this line's actually probably going to end up moving up. I know Garrett Green is a hope and heave quarterback. He can do some. He's kind of a wild man back there. But I think Neil Brown loves him. I love Donaldson. I mean they have some quality weapons. So I don't know if West Virginia can actually win this game. I don't know if they have quite the firepower. But I think they can at least put a scare in Penn State, and that's frankly I'm shorting. I have a stock report piece coming out at On3 later today, Andy, where I roll through 25 teams, and it's kind of who am I bullish on, who am I bearish on, and who am I unsure about. I've been pretty bearish on Penn State this entire offseason. I think Andy Kotelnicki is going to be – now, I could be wrong. We don't know anything. We're putting that out here. But my theory and my guess is that Andy Kotelnicki is going to be this year's Garrett Riley, where on paper he probably is the best offensive hire in the entire country, and yet I don't think it materially changes all that much for the team that he goes to because the head coach still seems to be in control of what how they're dictating offensively. That's at least until I see otherwise. That's what I'm rolling with.
So the question for me is, can West Virginia run the ball on these guys? Because Penn State's defense is going to be very good. Tom Allen comes in to run the D. This is another case of a guy who the head coaching thing didn't work out at Indiana, but he was a great defensive coordinator everywhere he's been.
He got paid a lot more money than Jeff Collins, too.
That's true. That's true. And they've got so many dudes. Like Abdul Carter is amazing, and they're going to bring him off the edge. That's going to be his position. Like they're not going to attempt to play him at linebacker. They're just going to let him do what he does. So that makes it a little bit more difficult. But let me roll these stats by you from last year, Jesse. Jaheim White as a freshman at West Virginia, 109 carries for 842 yards. In case you're wondering, that's a 7.7 yard average. CJ Donaldson, the big back. Remember, he got recruited as a tight end, became a running back. He was a sophomore last year. He averaged 4.7 yards a carry, but he's the thunder, and then Jaheim White's your lightning. But also, Garrett Green is a bit of lightning as well. He averaged 6.4 yards a carry, and that's after sacks got backed out. So Garrett Green is a threat with his legs. You're with you.
Speaking my language here, Andy. This is one of the most fun teams to play with in NCAA.
Yeah, I am with you on them putting a scare. Now, here's where our logic will fail if it fails. Because you mentioned Garrett Green is a hope and heave quarterback. There could be some hoping and heaving that lead to interceptions, short fields, easy touchdowns for Penn State, and Penn State just covers. But I am going to say that Garrett Green keeps them in this game. I don't know if they win it, but I am going to say West Virginia covers this spread. You can give me more than a touchdown for West Virginia at home. I'm going to take that.
Country roads, baby. Country roads. We're in lockstep. I mean, I think
I know we're going to have to disagree eventually. We didn't plan this, by the way, because this is actually bad pod. But, well, okay, here's one. I don't know if this is a controversial game because I feel like everybody's feeling the same way about this game. So I wonder if you are with the rest of us on this, or if you are going to go out on a limb here. Clemson against Georgia in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium. The Tigers are a 13.5-point underdog in this game. It feels like the consensus on this is that Georgia will do to Clemson what Georgia did to Oregon in week 1 2 years ago, but that will be a referendum on Dabo's transfer portal policy, essentially.
Yeah, well, here's the thing. I actually don't think it'll be a referendum in week 1 because, frankly, where Clemson is short is on depth. I think Clemson really likes their starting 22 outside of maybe some questions and concerns about, Cade Klubnik. What does he actually, can he fulfill that 5-star billing? I don't see it. I haven't seen it. Maybe Garrett Riley in this offense looks like what Garrett Riley was doing with Max Duggan 2 years ago at TCU. Again, skeptical. So I don't think that maybe it'll be a referendum eventually on the transfer portal. I feel like we've kind of beaten that narrative to a dead horse anyways. He refuses to participate. And so it's an unserious approach. And that's why, I do think using another S term, I do see this potentially being a splattering.
And that's the problem is if it is a splattering, what does that mean? Because Clemson still looks at itself as on Georgia's level. Clemson looks at itself as a national title contending team. And look, we're not that far removed from them winning 2 national titles. But they don't have the elite quarterback that they had for both of those national titles. That, Deshaun Watson, Trevor Lawrence, not walking through that door right now. They have to figure out a way to do it without a top 10 pick at quarterback. And they haven't quite figured that out yet. They got to develop some receivers. They haven't done that. T. Higgins was the last really great one. I guess T. Higgins and Amari Rodgers were the last 2. But they haven't had anybody like that. Meanwhile, Georgia just continues to reload because they recruit well and use the transfer portal. So we may see Ben Urosic, the Stanford transfer. We may see. Are we going to see Trevor Etienne? Do we think
it does feel like he's going to be suspended, doesn't it? It seems like
he had the DUI. I'm kind of wondering if they because Georgia can say, "Hey, look how deep we are. We don't need to worry about this." But Colby Young is an interesting one, especially with Ra Thomas kicked off the team. Like Colby Young is a transfer from Miami, big receiver. They kind of needed that red zone threat. So it'll be interesting because Georgia does what Clemson should be doing, where most of the guys are homegrown. Most of the guys are the people they got from high school. And then when they need something, they go get it.
It's a brilliant. It's not exactly an Einstein strategy. It's just it's what teams and what these best teams should be doing, and it's a dereliction of duty of what Dabo has done with that Clemson, with Clemson's approach, because they do feel they got Peter Woods, they got some dudes, they got Sammy Brown at linebacker, they've signed lots of blue chip players. Matt Luke has come in and shored up that offensive line.
Like Matt Luke coaching the offensive line gives me some confidence. And remember, Matt Luke was Georgia's offensive line coach a few years ago
for one of those title teams. Yeah, I mean, he's done. So it's not like Dabo has completely abandoned, a lot of his principles or what made Clemson successful previously. It's just that he has not continued to kind of grow and adapt with the times, and that I think frankly is going to hold the Tigers back. This should be a fun game. I will say, if Clemson it won't be if they keep it close, he won't do this. But if Clemson wins this game, if they upset Georgia, we thought his clapback at Tyler from Spartanburg last year was funny.
Clapback at all of us, and he'll have earned it.
We're gonna get an all-time Dabo I told you so rant.
Buy stock. If you bought stock, you're rich now.
Well, we'll see.
But if you short, we'll see. The people who shorted him might wind up being happier. But I'm taking Georgia to cover here. I think they're going to cover. I think this. I don't know if this is going to look exactly like the Georgia-Oregon game 2 years ago, but I think Georgia still with a point to prove after not making the playoff last year. I think they're still pissed off about that. I think they've had this offseason. Like, one of the things last year, Georgia started slowly. They did not have this marquee game to open with. And they actually had a kind of soft opening to the season. And it made them a softer team early in the season. They had to kind of round into form. My guess is they've been training a little more, with a little more of a purpose, knowing the level of athletes they're going to have on the other side of the field. And that's not usually a good thing for the opponent when it's Georgia.
Not when a rabid dog wants to eat. I'm with you. I think 14. If it gets to 14, I probably would take Clemson, just because there's a lot of backdoor, potential
possibility.
There.
Exactly. Once the backups come in,
If the line moves, I could see that, especially if Etienne's not playing. Georgia a little shorthanded at running back, but I don't know. This will be a good amuse-bouche for the rest of the afternoon, I think.
Yeah, if this were a first-time starter for Georgia at quarterback, I remember when Clemson opened the season in Athens in 2021, when it was JT Daniels. Now, he wasn't a first-time starter, but It was
You mean in Charlotte?
Oh, that's right. That's right. And then it was a slobber knocker. Neither team could score on the other, and Georgia, ground out a win. Like Clemson could maybe turn it into that level of game if this was not Carson Beck with a full season under his belt, knowing how to use the weapons he has. I think if Georgia had a less experienced, less dynamic quarterback, then yeah, I would go with Clemson in this game to cover. But I think Georgia's going to be able to score on them, and I'm not sure how Clemson's going to be able to score on Georgia. All right, let us move on. Speaking of not being sure how anybody's going to score, you know what we do every week? We pick the Iowa total. And this one's a fascinating one. Illinois State at Iowa. Now, Iowa's a 23.5-point favorite. We're not picking the spread. We can reference the spread. We can talk about it. But I'm more interested in the total. Kirk Ferentz is not coaching in this game. Tim Lester, the new Iowa offensive coordinator, is coaching in this game. Will it look appreciably different than the Brian Ferentz offense? And now I'll mention the spread again. So this is a 23.5-point spread with a 41.5-point total. So we're talking about Vegas thinking this is like a 32-9 Iowa win. But my thing on this, Jesse, is I feel like if you take the Iowa over in a game like this, you have to be confident that Iowa can score all 42 points that you need, because Illinois State might not score.
And I am not confident in that, Andy. I do not. We're talking about the drive for 365 a year ago, and they couldn't get 20-something points a game. Cade McNamara threw multiple interceptions in like the first Iowa scrimmage. I just no, the flat no. Now maybe you disagree because you think that they'll score a couple defensive touchdowns and somehow manage to hit that near 6 touchdowns total. But no, I do not see it. This has with Kurt Ferentz, watching this game from his couch. This game has 23-0 written all over it.
Well, what if Seth Wallace, the acting head coach, just is like, screw it, let's go 5 wide. Let's spread this thing out and let's go.
Did they have 5 receivers? I don't even know if they have 5 receivers. They may have
I don't
tight
either.
ends out there.
Well, and remember, receivers coach John Budmeyer also suspended. Insert your own "what does the Iowa receivers coach actually do" joke right here.
Apparently, he recruited Cade McNamara too well. In fact,
hey, it worked. If Cade McNamara actually winds up being a good quarterback, Kirk Ferentz sitting out the Illinois State game is an easy price to pay. Easy price to pay. Oh boy, this is going to be a lot of fun though. I am going to take the under. I learned my lesson last year. I think I took an Iowa over and got burned once or twice.
Oh, one of my bold predictions a year ago was that there would be no sweat in the drive for 365. That was just complete. You talk about completely.
Oh, it's the drive for 325. You're making it harder on Brian Ferentz than it actually was.
325. Excuse me. Yeah, drive for 325. I just completely whiffed on that.
By the way, I think this is going to be so much fun this year because maybe Iowa's a little bit different on offense. We forget they had a lot of injuries last year. Cade McNamara was hurt from the get-go, was not himself. Then he gets knocked out for the season. Luke Lachey, their best tight end, got knocked out for the season. But maybe this is just a big year for Nico Ragaini. Maybe it is. Willie Thomas in the chat. Death, taxes, Iowa under. We're taking the Iowa under. Jesse, can we disagree on something? Oh,
well, here's
one.
Going?
Here's one. So if you've been paying attention to the chat this entire show, this is the game everybody's been arguing about in the chat. The Miami Hurricanes coming to the Swamp as a 2.5-point favorite. Miami at Florida. You call it the Anxiety Bowl. I call it the Pitchforks and Torches Bowl. Whoever wins, great. Whoever loses, that fan base is completely melting down. This is going to be incredible theater. Incredible theater because the losing fan base is going to want their coach fired before the next game.
I can't wait for this game. This is going to be the you need to have message board geniuses just like already loaded up
on standby. Just screenshot.
On second screen. The second this basically once this game hits the second quarter, because fans are going to be going apoplectic one way or another. Look, Miami again in my stock report piece, kind of teaser there. My little blurb on them is basically succinctly, it's the reason I'm unsure about the Hurricanes is I think they probably on paper are the most talented team in the ACC and should win the conference, and yet at the same time I could see them losing in Gainesville and losing to Georgia Tech and Louisville again this year. So it's which Miami do you see? Which Miami do you believe in? I'm gonna roll with the Gators. I think that they cover the 2 points, and not only that, Andy, if you want to disagree, agree, whatever, I think they win the game. I think Florida wins the game.
I mean, the spread is so small. If you're picking Florida, you may as well pick money line. Like that's at that point. I don't know. I've spent the entire summer thinking I'm going to pick Florida here just because I don't trust Miami, but I'm not sure I trust Florida either. Like I don't trust either of these teams. I have no idea what's going to happen here. No idea. So you've got Cam Ward coming in as a starting quarterback for Miami. We've seen him at Washington State, and we've seen him good at Washington State. We've also seen him just throw up lollipops for interceptions at Washington State. Damian Martinez at running back going to be pretty good. But will that line be able to reset the line of scrimmage? Will they be able to move the ball on Florida? Florida's defense, another one where perhaps they're tackling better. They went and got a lot of guys out of the transfer portal that are older, that have been through some stuff. Like they could not tackle. They could not stop a nosebleed last season. If they tackle better, suddenly this is a much more interesting game. And I am like, it's funny because you've got some people who are just out on Graham Mertz. I don't get it. If you watch Graham Mertz at Florida last year, he was a very good quarterback for them. Like he was very capable. So I just don't know where to go with this. The fact that you said Florida now, I thought I was the one going out on the limb there if I was going to pick Florida. I don't know if I might be making a change here. I might be calling an audible.
I've been dubbed a Miami hater all off season. Again, last year it was the Dion Do You Believe. This year for me, that it's Miami. What do you think about this though? Is this a game that's like all outcomes are possible? Because
this is a game where all outcomes yes. Yes, Miami blowout win, Florida blowout win. Close Miami win, close Florida. Everything is on the table.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what makes a game like this so fun and tantalizing. Is that Kevin Garnett, anything is possible. Like you just scream it to the mountaintops. I mean, it's gonna be just you talk about just swamp. What in people's pants. 3:30 afternoon in Gainesville with the humidity, heat. I mean, this is going to be. This is going to be a fun one. This
is one where the atmosphere definitely can affect the game. Like it is going to be unhinged in that stadium on Saturday. So it's up to Miami to quiet it down quickly, or it could get like you look at the Tennessee game last year where they came in without their starting center. And all of a sudden, it just could not function in that environment. If Miami can settle it down quickly, I think they're okay. So I'm thinking about how I felt about Florida State all offseason. And I was like, I'm riding with them. I think they're going to win the ACC. And then I see them play, and I'm like, that's not anywhere near the team I envisioned. So all offseason, I've been like, okay, I'm going to pick Florida in this game because I don't necessarily trust Miami yet. Florida's at home. They've got the environment. They obviously need the win. But I'm gonna call an audible. I'm picking the Canes.
You're rolling with Cam Ward, Damian Martinez.
Picking the Canes. I spent months thinking I was going to pick Florida in this game. And I may look like a complete moron now, but I'm picking the Canes because I'm just going, okay, what if everything I set in stone over 9 months is wrong. I think Florida State showed us that. And Miami just is just a better roster, and they're just good. Like, what if that happens? And that's the thing with this Florida schedule too. There's a lot of opponents that they have to face that they might just be good. And no matter how much you've incrementally improved, it's not, you have to be really good to win against this schedule. And I don't know if Florida's really good yet.
I can't. There's no way I can retort any of that. I'm rolling with the Gators based on them being at home and it being kind of a gut. I think Billy, spending some time around him this offseason, he certainly has not carried himself like a coach who thinks he's about to get fired. And that's not nothing. And yet, as we just saw, as you alluded to Florida State, just because of what a coach thinks they have or what they think they are, doesn't mean your team ends up playing that way. And it's going to be I think it's going to get pretty hairy in Gainesville one way or another come about 7 p.m. for one of these coaches.
There's a take for this game. There's a blazing hot take no matter what happens. But the chat seems split 50-50 on this thing. You and I are split 50-50 on it. You're picking the Gators. I'm picking the Canes. This is going to be spectacular. Mitch, the swamp ain't dookie. Florida fans think a stadium will beat Miami. Well, I mean, I can understand a Miami fan not understanding home field advantage.
I was
concept.
He literally put that on a tee for you.
And I'm picking his team. But I'm sorry, you can't throw that red meat out there for me and not have me chomp on it.
Self-owned.
Oh, all right. 2 more big games this weekend. By the way, before we get to these 2 titanic tilts, there's a lot of games that we're not talking about because we're just looking at them like they're potential blowouts. I believe our friend Ralph Russo from the Associated Press counted 53 FBS versus FCS games if you count week 0 and week 1. What that means to me, Jesse, is not there's going to be a bunch of boring games. There are going to be a bunch of boring games. But there's going to be some upsets that we're like, what the hell just happened? And I don't know which ones they're going to be. So just be aware, guys. There's going to be a few of those this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be the ones that you get the second screen. You're immediately turning it on, and you're like, Virginia Tech is losing to Old Dominion.
Yeah,
it's like, hey, it's happened before. I don't, but yeah, these marquee games, they take the spotlight, but there's great college football all day Saturday.
Yeah, and we talked about North Dakota State and Colorado, obviously. South Dakota State, Oklahoma State kind of falls in that bucket too. So there will be some strange things that happen, whether it's a group of 5 team or an FCS team upsetting a power conference team. It is entirely possible. We're going to see multiple of that. But let us get back to the brand on brand violence. Notre Dame at Texas A&M. Notre Dame is a 2.5-point dog going to College Station. We don't know what Notre Dame's offensive line is going to look like exactly. Charles Jagasaw, their starting left tackle, out for the season. He got hurt a few weeks ago. Now, as Tyler Horka from Blue and Gold pointed out when he was on the show, Charles Jagasaw had only started 1 game. He started the Sun Bowl last year. He was a redshirt freshman. So it wasn't like Notre Dame was going to have a veteran-heavy offensive line that has been in these situations before going into this game. It was always going to be younger, less experienced guys having to play against a really good Texas A&M defensive line in a really tough environment. So I don't know that Charles Jagasaw being hurt should change what you were going to think about it. Like, if you thought Notre Dame was going to win this game before that, I don't know that it should change it that much.
I'm going to push back on that, Andy. I think that, I think that that's kind of putting lipstick on a pig, because Jagasaw was a blue chip recruit who had gotten to spend basically 2 years in the program. Now Notre Dame is going to have to play a true freshman at that spot who has not been practicing, with the team for 2 seasons. So when you're then saying, oh, hey, in your first career start, you got to go up against Nick Scorton and Shamar Turner and Shamar Stewart and these boys, that's tough. I think really the bigger question though, if the reason that I'm I still haven't made a final decision of how I'm leaning on this game. It's that what do we see from Riley Leonard at quarterback? I mean, how healthy is he? Is he going to be kind of a willing runner like he was a couple years ago at Duke, or does he still kind of have some lingering? I don't know if it's effects or if it's a mental thing or what. From getting hurt last year. So if he can show up, Notre Dame needs this game. I will say that Notre Dame needs to win this game with the rest of their schedule because now that Florida State game doesn't look quite as good. And they play like multiple FCS teams. They play both service academies.
Georgia Tech game looks tougher though.
Georgia Tech game looks tougher, but there's 9 or 10 wins kind of just sitting there for Notre Dame. And so if you lose this game, I don't know how many impressive performances you're going to have for the playoff. I mean, we'll see what Louisville is. Again, we're kind of guesstimating here before we've seen 1 week of football. But I think the Irish really need this one. And on the flip side, I mean, the Aggies have had a quiet confidence the entire offseason. So, I mean, what are you leaning with Connor Wegman, or where are you going with this?
This is another one I feel like I've thought one thing about this game all offseason, and that is that A&M is going to win this thing. The fact that the public feels that way, Vegas feels that way. Now I'm like,
the line's
I'm falling into the trap again.
Yeah, because Notre Dame opened up originally as a favorite, and with the injuries and with some of the other information, the line has much like North Carolina, just not with the expediency that it was last night, but much like that game, the line has flipped.
It came back a little bit because it actually moved to A&M -3 for a bit last week, and then now it's come back to -2.5. But yeah, so because I do think that Notre Dame's offense should be more dynamic than what we saw last year. Because they're going to have receivers that can, like Chris Mitchell, the FIU transfer, should be very helpful, but also just having all those guys healthy. Like Jaden Greathouse was not healthy for all last season. Riley Leonard, if he's healthy, and again, we haven't seen healthy Riley Leonard but think about this. Let's go back to the game where Riley Leonard got hurt, which ironically was against Notre Dame last year. Riley Leonard was keeping Duke in it. Think about Riley Leonard against Clemson. Like, he elevates the people around him when he's healthy.
He also threw 3 touchdowns last year.
Yeah. He was hurt most of the season.
Yeah.
Okay. So I take it you're taking the Aggies.
I'm gonna go with Nick Scorton. I think he's gonna be of the transfers in this game coming out of this game that everyone's talking about. It's gonna be the edge rusher for Texas A&M.
So we know how I feel about Mike Elko. We know I feel like it's going to be a very successful tenure for him in College Station. And in fact, this could be a very successful year, though I don't think he has to deal with any sort of unreasonable expectations. That said, I think Notre Dame needs this game. I think we are sleeping on Notre Dame a little bit because they had a key injury. I think Notre Dame is going to win it. You give me a few points, I'll take them.
Eat them up.
This will be an interesting one because you're right. Notre Dame needs to win this one for its playoff chances because the schedule's not great. And usually you can say, oh, a typical Notre Dame schedule, you go 10-2 against it, you're going to be an at-large team in the playoff. With this one, you might have to go 11-1 to get the at-large. So you're going to need to win this one. So I'll take the Irish here. And if they don't win it, they're behind the 8 ball for sure. One more. Sunday night in Vegas. LSU versus USC. A matchup of 2 teams whose defenses last year could not be much worse. And they have made changes on the coaching staff in both cases. Both of them replacing Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks.
It's a Spider-Man meme.
It is. And I'm telling you right now, Jesse, I'm not worried about either offense. I think this game comes down to whose defense actually got better.
Yeah, I mean, what's the final spread on this one? What are we sitting at?
So the total is 63.5. We can pick the total too if you want.
Total 63.5. I mean, you're going to take an under in LSU USC? I mean,
I doubt it.
That's a
Yeah,
high
LSU's a
total.
4.5-point favorite. Total 63.5. So we're talking about a shootout of epic proportions, which is exactly what I want in my standalone Sunday night game.
Brian Kelly cannot lose this game, right? I mean, if you 3 straight years, if you lose a spotlight showcase game where you're the only game everybody's watching and you lose and you were a favorite 2 of those times at least, I think this would be, you talk about the Florida game, Florida Miami, narrative. This game is close because USC is basically budget LSU. They just haven't spent quite as much money in the transfer portal. They don't have quite as many good players. But you still say, hey, their coach has a track record of winning, a lot of big games. I don't know. I mean, I'm actually surprised that this spread is not even a little bit tighter, just because I do think there's some real concerns about LSU's front seven. And yet it's not exactly like we have a ton of answers about, what D'Anton Lynn's working with at USC. It's not like he got to bring over all those hosses and dudes he had over at UCLA.
He brought some of them, though. He did bring some. No, Laitu Latu is obviously an Indianapolis Colt, but look, I'm going to turn the question you asked on you. You asked, Can Brian Kelly afford to lose this game? Can Lincoln Riley afford to lose this game? Remember, they've got Utah State next week, but then they've got at Michigan, and then Wisconsin comes. Like, things get very tough very early for USC. If they don't win this game, they're in a world of hurt, especially, like, let's say their offense is not as dynamic as maybe they'd hoped, and LSU does play well on defense. That gives you no confidence with them going into Michigan.
No, you're not wrong, but I still think there's more pressure on Brian Kelly, frankly, just because he's got a bigger crooked number next to his name here. LSU, I think, has, they've at least been considered a fringe playoff team, in this new 12-team era. I think if a school like LSU or Penn State doesn't make it in this first 12-team playoff, their fan bases are going to be pretty rabidly angry because
I think Brian Kelly's bought himself. Like, winning the SEC West in year 1 helps. Having a Heisman Trophy winner in year 2, even though the defense stunk, helps. Like, he's bought himself time. And you look at LSU's 25 recruiting class. Like, what's been LSU's problem? Like, for whatever reason, the LSU cornerback factory seems to have shut down. Like, you look at that recruiting class for 25, they're reopening that factory. So I think they're addressing the needs, but the defensive needs personnel-wise have not been addressed. So again, like we talked about with the Georgia Tech game, like we talked about with the North Carolina game, does having new defensive coaching staff dramatically improve the defense when the defense is a lot of the same guys? And I think that's so. D'Anton Lynn at USC at least got to bring in. He brought in a couple guys from UCLA, brought in some other guys from around the country, where you see where he was trying to bring in the body types that he prefers. Because obviously the defense Alex Grinch ran, one of the big criticisms of Alex Grinch was that, especially up front, the body types were not what they needed to be. And I mean, all you got to do is look at what Brent Venables had to do on Oklahoma's defensive line as soon as Alex Grinch left. Like, they had to immediately import 300-pounders because they didn't have any. And you've seen Alex Grinch get a bunch of long DBs. He wants long, rangy corners. He got some of those. So, or see D'Anton Lynn get those guys. So it will be a fascinating kind of case study because LSU really didn't change much personnel-wise, but did hire Blake Baker from Missouri. Does Blake Baker alone and the staff members he brought, do they change that much? And does D'Anton Lynn change that much? That's my question. And the thing is, like, we may not know because LSU replacing Jaden Daniels, but also replacing Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., 2 first-round receivers. Do they have a first-round receiver on this team? I don't know.
I do know they have the best offensive line in this game, and that's why I'm going to be that, and the Brian Kelly desperation, just him needing this win, is why I'm going to go with LSU here. It's kind of a weird number. It's in that Bill Simmons Vegas zone where it's 4.5. It's kind of an odd number. Not crazy about that. But again, can Danton Lynn teach a new group of dogs how to tackle? Because as we talked about with the Georgia Tech coach, Tyler Santucci was able to do that. That was a lot of the same guys, and Georgia Tech looked fundamentally and very much improved there. USC, I mean, it was a car crash, crash test dummies, trying to tackle folks a year ago. It was just pathetic. So have they fixed that? We'll see. Colin Lacey and some of these guys that LSU has on the perimeter, I think they still like those guys, even as you mentioned, you did lose a pair of first-round wideouts.
Yeah, and they bring in CJ Daniels from Liberty.
Yeah,
so Connor Lacey's still there. So they got talent there. Garrett Nussmeier, we think is going to be a very good quarterback too. And I think Miller Moss can be just fine. Like, I realized they brought on Jaden Mayava, and it took a while for Lincoln to name Miller Moss the starter. I think he's going to be fine too. This is all about the defense. I think LSU covers here. I think it's a fun game. I'm going to say LSU covers and take the over.
So you got them hitting the 63.5. I'll say LSU covers, but it's going to be they're not going to get 63.5.
Okay, taking the under, which means somebody's defense got better.
Somebody's defense got better, and I think as we saw in that Florida State game, sometimes these possessions can shrink up quickly.
Well, and okay, while we're talking about that, the helmet communication, we had coaches tell us in the offseason this could lead to more huddling because it's just easier to tell the quarterback and then he tells the team. It may slow teams down. We only have the few games we saw, and some of these, like I watched SMU play. They still had all the signs. They were still trying to go very fast.
Last year said they wanted to go faster.
Right. So I do think we're going to see some teams try that, but I also think we're going to see some teams slow down. So some of these totals may have to come down as the season goes on because we may just see fewer possessions in games.
Yeah, we're going to find out. And it's lovely that college football can't call it the 2-minute warning. We have to call it the 2-minute
timeout. You call it whatever you want, everybody.
Yeah.
Call it whatever you want. Just don't call me late for kickoff. Sorry, I had to. You teed me up. Just like that Miami fan talking about home field advantage teed me up. You teed me up. Jesse, we've picked some games. We're guaranteed to be wrong.
Hey, now they can use PrizePicks and they can either fade us or double down on us and
yep.
And let's see. I mean, hey, I'm just glad it's been a wild and wacky off season. I'm just glad the games are here. The talking season's over. It's time.
It's not over yet. We've got a Connor Stalions documentary. To go.
Yeah.
Then I'll tell you what. I'm going to watch Connor Stalions documentary. I will give my review on the show, and then we will officially declare the offseason over.
Rubber stamp.
I will find like a flash drive and bury it in my yard to signify the end of the offseason in honor of Connor Stalions.
Get like a gavel and just like smash it. Like destroying the evidence.
It's going to be amazing. Jesse Simonton, thank you so much. Cannot wait to talk about all this stuff with you as the games go on. Cannot wait to read what you write at On3. We got the stock report coming out. I've got bracketology. Got a lot more fun stuff for you to read and to watch. And remember, schedule change. We're on in the morning, Monday through Thursday during the season. And then we come back Saturday night. So Monday through Thursday, Saturday night. And obviously, when everything breaks, when things happen, we got that emergency show siren for you. So it's all going to be there for you. We'll give you what you need in any way you need it, whether it's written, video, audio, podcast, you name it. It's going to be such a fun season. It's game week. Let's go. We'll talk to you tomorrow.